The property line wore. The surveyor's bright orange spray paint was still wet on my fence post when Patricia Kellerman came storming across my backyard, her Hermes handbag swinging like a weapon. Her face was red with rage, and her perfectly styled auburn hair was actually disheveled, something I'd never seen in the 3 years she'd been terrorizing our neighborhood as HOA president. "You think you're clever, don't you, Martinez?" she hissed, pointing at the fresh survey markers. "Moving your fence 6 inches won't save you from the violations." I stood my ground, holding the official survey document that had just changed everything. "Actually, Patricia, it's going to save me from a lot more than that." She snatched the papers from my hands, her manicured nails clicking against the county seal. As she read, her expression shifted from anger to confusion to something approaching panic. "This is impossible," she whispered. "Turn to page 3, I said calmly. "The part about the HOA common area that you've been illegally maintaining for the past 5 years. Her face went white. Behind her, I could see neighbors gathering at their windows, sensing that something significant was happening. They'd all been victims of Patricia's arbitrary rule enforcement, her ridiculous fines, her threats of foreclosure over grass height and mailbox colors. "You have no idea what you've done," she said. But her voice was shaking now. "Actually, Patricia, I know exactly what I've done. The question is, do you know what you've done?" She dropped the survey papers and fled. "My name is Carlos Martinez, and I'm a 45-year-old electrical contractor with 20 years of experience reading property blueprints, understanding building codes, and dealing with local government bureaucracy. When I bought my house in Millbrook Estates 2 years ago, I thought I was getting a peaceful suburban home where I could raise my 2 teenage daughters after my divorce. What I got was a front row seat to Patricia Kellerman's reign of terror. Patricia is a 52-year-old real estate attorney who treats our HOA like her personal kingdom. She's married to a plastic surgeon, drives a white BMW with vanity plates, reading Law Girl, and has never met a rule she couldn't weaponize against someone she didn't like. Her house is a massive colonial revival that dominates the end of our cul-de-sac, complete with professionally maintained landscaping and security cameras pointed at every neighboring property. The trouble started 2 weeks after I moved in, when I received my first violation notice, $50 for non-compliant exterior lighting. My porch light was apparently too bright and created light pollution that affected neighboring properties. When I called to dispute it, Patricia's assistant, Linda, explained that the HOA had recently updated their lighting guidelines and all residents were expected to comply immediately. I replaced the bulb with a dimmer one and paid the fine. The second violation came a month later, $75 for unauthorized vehicle storage. My work van, which I parked in my own driveway, was considered commercial equipment and violated the residential use restrictions. This time, I attended the monthly HOA meeting to argue my case. The meeting was held in the community center, a sterile room with fluorescent lighting and folding chairs arranged in rows like a courtroom. Patricia sat at the head table with 2 other board members, looking like a judge presiding over municipal court. About 15 residents attended, most of them looking defeated and resigned. "Mr. Martinez," Patricia said when I approached the podium, "I understand you want to discuss your vehicle violation. I want to understand why my work van is any different from Dr. Chen's medical equipment van or Mrs. Rodriguez's catering truck. They both park in their driveways. Those are pre-existing arrangements that were grandfathered under the previous guidelines." "What previous guidelines?" "I've read the HOA covenant and there's no mention of commercial vehicle restrictions." Patricia smiled coldly. "The board has the authority to implement new policies as needed to maintain property values and community standards. Your van is an eyesore that affects everyone's investment. It's a clean, well-maintained vehicle that I need for my job. Then perhaps you should consider renting commercial parking space off-site." The other board members nodded in agreement. The residents in the audience avoided eye contact. Everyone had learned not to challenge Patricia directly. I paid that fine too, but I also started doing research. Over the next few months, I discovered that Patricia had been systematically targeting certain residents with increasingly arbitrary violations. Young families received noise complaints for children playing in their yards. Elderly residents were cited for unkempt landscaping if they couldn't maintain their gardens to her standards. Anyone who questioned her authority found themselves buried in fines and threats. The breaking point came when she went after my neighbor, Mrs. Chen, a 78-year-old widow who lived alone in the house next to mine. Mrs. Chen had been cited for structural violations because her driveway had developed small cracks from normal settling. The fine was $300, with additional penalties accumulating daily until the repairs were completed. Mrs. Chen showed me the violation notice with tears in her eyes. "I can't afford to repave my driveway," she said. "My husband handled all the house maintenance, and I don't know where to even start." "How much would it cost to fix?" I asked. The contractor said at least $3,000. I don't have that kind of money. That's when I decided to take a closer look at exactly what Patricia had been doing and what authority she actually had to do it. I spent my evenings reading the HOA covenant, county ordinances, and state regulations governing homeowners associations. What I found was disturbing. Patricia had been enforcing rules that didn't exist, imposing fines beyond the authorized limits, and threatening foreclosure procedures that weren't legally valid. But the most interesting discovery came when I pulled the original property survey for my house from the county records office. The survey showed something that made my heart race. The property lines weren't where anyone thought they were, including Patricia. The harassment escalated after I helped Mrs. Chen find a contractor to repair her driveway cracks for $400 instead of the $3,000, quote, Patricia's preferred vendor had provided. Within a week, I received 3 separate violation notices. $100 for contractor parking violations because the repair truck had been in the neighborhood, $75 for noise disturbance from the work being done, and $125 for failure to obtain architectural approval for the driveway repairs. The violations were absurd, but they revealed Patricia's strategy. She wasn't just enforcing rules, she was creating new ones specifically to punish residents who didn't submit to her authority. I attended the next HOA meeting and requested copies of all the policies being used to issue violations. Patricia's response was swift and telling. "Policy documents are available for review during regular business hours at the HOA office," she said. "We don't provide copies to residents who are currently in violation status." What's my violation status? You have outstanding fines totaling $300 and are therefore not in good standing with the association. I want to see the specific policies that justify those fines. The board has the authority to interpret community standards as needed. If you disagree with our interpretation, you can request a hearing. I'm requesting a hearing. Hearing requests must be submitted in writing with a $200 administrative fee. It was a perfect catch-22. I couldn't challenge the violations without paying a fee, but I couldn't pay the fee without acknowledging the validity of the violations. Meanwhile, the fines continued accumulating daily late fees. But Patricia made her first real mistake when she decided to escalate beyond simple harassment. 2 weeks after the hearing request, I came home to find a certified letter waiting for me. The envelope was thick, official looking, and bore the seal of Patricia's law firm. Inside was a formal legal demand that made my blood run cold. The letter claimed that my work van constituted a commercial nuisance that violated county zoning ordinances and threatened the residential character of the neighborhood. It demanded that I either remove the vehicle permanently or face legal action for breach of restrictive covenants and diminution of property values. The letter also included a fee schedule for enforcement costs that would be added to my account: $500 for legal consultation, $200 for document preparation, $100 for certified mailing, and $75 for administrative processing. Nearly $900 in fees for a single threatening letter. But the most audacious part came at the end: a demand for $2,500 in damages for the alleged property value reduction caused by my van, plus an additional $1,500 for ongoing monitoring costs to ensure compliance. Patricia was trying to extort $4,000 from me for parking my work vehicle in my own driveway. I called her office immediately and demanded to speak with her directly. "Mr. Martinez," she said, her voice dripping with false professionalism, "I assume you received our correspondence regarding your covenant violations. This is extortion, Patricia. You're demanding money for damages that don't exist." "The damages are very real. Your commercial vehicle has created ongoing depreciation of neighboring property values. As an attorney, I can assure you that our position is legally sound. Show me the appraisals that prove these damages. That information is proprietary to the association. Then, show me the county ordinance that prohibits work vehicles in residential driveways. The restrictions are contained in our community covenant, which you agreed to when you purchased your property. I've read the covenant, Patricia. There's nothing about commercial vehicles. The board has the authority to interpret and enforce community standards. If you disagree, you're welcome to retain your own attorney." Maybe I will. That's your choice. But I should mention that continuing to violate community standards while under enforcement action could result in foreclosure proceedings. My hands were shaking when I hung up. Patricia had just threatened to foreclose on my house because I parked my work van in my own driveway. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and made a decision that would change everything. Instead of hiring a lawyer to fight Patricia's bogus claims, I was going to do what I should have done months ago. I was going to get a professional survey of my property. The next morning, I called Precision Land Surveying and hired them to conduct a complete boundary survey of my lot. The cost was $800, but I had a feeling it would be the best money I'd ever spent. While waiting for the survey to be completed, I decided to do some research on Patricia's background. What I found was illuminating. Patricia had been the HOA president for 5 years, during which time she'd filed more than 200 violation notices, initiated dozens of legal threats, and collected over $50 in fines and fees. Her law firm had also been paid more than $30,000 in enforcement costs by the HOA during that same period. She was literally profiting from the harassment of her neighbors. But the most interesting discovery came from county court records. Patricia had been involved in 3 separate lawsuits with previous neighbors, all involving property line disputes. In each case, she'd claimed that adjacent property owners were encroaching on her land or violating boundary agreements. In each case, she'd been wrong. The pattern was clear. Patricia used her legal training and position of authority to intimidate people who couldn't afford to fight back. She'd perfected a system of manufactured violations, escalating fines, and legal threats that generated revenue for both the HOA and her law firm. What she didn't know was that I'd spent 20 years dealing with construction disputes, property codes, and municipal bureaucracy. I understood exactly how property law worked, and I knew when someone was trying to scam me. The survey results arrived on a Thursday morning, and they exceeded my wildest expectations. The survey revealed something extraordinary. My property line extended 6 feet further east than anyone had realized, including Patricia. The wooden fence that had been installed by previous owners was actually 6 feet inside my property boundary, meaning I owned a strip of land that the HOA had been maintaining as common area for the past 5 years. More importantly, Patricia's prized flower garden, the one she'd spent thousands of dollars landscaping and used as a showcase for her gardening expertise, was entirely on my property. I stared at the survey map, tracing the bright red boundary lines with my finger. The implications were staggering. Patricia had been citing me for violations while illegally occupying my land. She'd been using HOA funds to maintain landscaping on private property. She'd been charging me fees for infractions while she was the one actually violating property boundaries. But the best part was yet to come. I called the county assessor's office and requested records for the past 5 years of property tax assessments. What I discovered was that the land Patricia had been maintaining as common area was actually being taxed as part of my property. I'd been paying property taxes on land that the HOA claimed ownership of. The county had no record of any easement, dedication, or transfer of that land to the HOA. As far as the official records were concerned, Patricia had been trespassing on my property for years. I spent the next week gathering additional evidence. I photographed Patricia's flower garden, documented the sprinkler system she'd installed, and researched the cost of the landscaping improvements she'd made. The total value of her encroachment exceeded $15,000. Then I made a few strategic phone calls. First, I contacted the county zoning office and filed a formal complaint about unauthorized use of residential property. The zoning administrator confirmed that maintaining ornamental landscaping on someone else's property without permission was a violation of county ordinances. Second, I called the State Bar Association's ethics hotline and filed a complaint about Patricia's use of her law firm to generate revenue from HOA enforcement actions. The ethics investigator was very interested in the financial relationship between Patricia's legal practice and her HOA position. Third, I retained my own attorney not to defend against Patricia's threats, but to file a counterclaim for trespassing, property damage, and abuse of legal process. My attorney's name is David Kim, a property rights specialist who'd handled several HOA disputes. When I showed him the survey results and Patricia's threatening letter, he smiled for the first time since I'd met him. "Carlos, this is beautiful," he said. "She's been trespassing on your property while threatening to foreclose for violations that don't exist. The legal term for this is unclean hands, and it's going to destroy her credibility. What are our options? We can sue for trespassing, demand removal of her improvements, and seek damages for the unauthorized use of your land. But I think there's a better approach. What's that? We invite her to negotiate a resolution, give her a chance to back down gracefully before we destroy her publicly. You think she'll back down? David laughed. Based on what you've told me about her personality, she'll double down and make this 10 times worse, which is exactly what we want. Why? Because the bigger the fight she picks, the more evidence we'll have of her abusing her position. And Carlos? When this is over, she's going to learn that threatening people with legal action only works if you actually understand the law. The confrontation began exactly as David had predicted. Instead of acknowledging the survey results or attempting to negotiate, Patricia responded to my attorney's letter with an even more aggressive legal threat. Her new demand letter claimed that my survey was fraudulent and that I was attempting to steal common area property through manufactured evidence. She threatened to seek criminal charges for fraud and demanded $10,000 in damages for my malicious interference with HOA property. She also made a critical mistake. She scheduled an emergency HOA meeting to discuss my illegal actions and recommend my expulsion from the association. David and I attended that meeting with a briefcase full of evidence and a plan to end Patricia's tyranny once and for all. The community center was packed with residents who'd heard rumors about the property dispute. Patricia sat at the head table looking supremely confident, flanked by her two board allies and a stack of legal documents. Ladies and gentlemen, Patricia began, we're here tonight to address Mr. Martinez's fraudulent attempt to claim HOA common area as his private property. This is an unprecedented attack on our community's shared spaces. She gestured dramatically toward a poster board showing aerial photos of the disputed area. As you can see, this garden area has been maintained by the HOA for over 5 years. It's clearly common property that benefits all residents. Mr. Martinez has fabricated a survey to support his illegal land grab, she continued. Tonight, we'll be voting on whether to expel him from the association and pursue criminal charges for fraud. When she finished her presentation, I stood up and walked to the front of the room. Patricia, before we continue, I'd like to clarify something. You keep referring to this as common area and HOA property. Can you show me the deed or easement document that proves the HOA owns this land? She shuffled through her papers. The ownership is established by long-term use and community maintenance. That's not how property law works. Do you have any legal document showing HOA ownership? The HOA has maintained that area for 5 years without objection. Actually, the HOA has been trespassing on my property for 5 years, and I have the documentation to prove it. I nodded to David, who began distributing copies of the survey, tax records, and county assessor documents to everyone in the room. Ladies and gentlemen, what you're looking at is proof that Patricia Kellerman has been illegally occupying private property while using her position as HOA president to harass the actual property owner. The room erupted in murmurs as residents examined the evidence. Patricia's face was turning red, but she maintained her composure. This is a manufactured crisis, she said. Mr. Martinez is trying to confuse the issue with technical documents that don't reflect the reality of community ownership. Patricia, I said calmly, I've been paying property taxes on this land for 2 years. The county assessor has no record of any HOA ownership. You've been maintaining your flower garden on my property without permission. That's absurd. It's documented fact. But here's the interesting part. While you've been trespassing on my property, you've also been citing me for violations that don't exist, threatening foreclosure procedures that aren't legally valid, and using your law firm to generate revenue from manufactured HOA disputes. I turned to face the audience. How many of you have received violation notices for rules that aren't in the HOA covenant? How many have been threatened with legal action for problems that never existed? Hands started going up around the room. Mrs. Chen raised her hand. The Rodriguez family raised their hands. The Johnsons, the Patels, the Williamses, nearly half the room was raising their hands. Patricia has been running a scam, I continued. She creates violations, threatens legal action, and then bills the HOA for enforcement costs through her law firm. She's been profiting from the harassment of her neighbors. Patricia stood up, her professional composure finally cracking. You have no right to make these accusations. I have served this community faithfully for 5 years. You've been stealing from this community for 5 years, I replied, and tonight, it stops. David stepped forward and handed Patricia a formal legal document. Ms. Kellerman, you're being served with a lawsuit for trespassing, abuse of process, and fraudulent enforcement actions. You have 30 days to respond. This is harassment. No, Patricia. Harassment is what you did to Mrs. Chen when you fined her $300 for normal driveway settling. Harassment is what you did to the Rodriguez family when you threatened foreclosure over children playing in their yard. Harassment is what you did to me when you demanded $4,000 for parking my work van in my own driveway. I pulled out my phone and showed the room photos of Patricia's flower garden. This is what $15,000 worth of landscaping looks like when it's installed on someone else's property without permission. Patricia has been using HOA funds to beautify her illegal garden while threatening residents with fines for minor infractions. The room was completely silent now. Patricia looked around desperately, but her bored allies were staring at the floor, and the residents were looking at her with expressions ranging from anger to disgust. I want a vote of no confidence, called out Mrs. Chen. Patricia needs to be removed as president immediately. Seconded, shouted Frank Rodriguez. All in favor of removing Patricia Kellerman as HOA president, say aye. The response was overwhelming. Nearly every resident in the room voted to remove Patricia from office. Patricia gathered her papers with shaking hands. You people have no idea what you're doing. Without proper leadership, this community will fall apart. Patricia, I said as she headed for the door, you have 2 weeks to remove your landscaping from my property. After that, I'll be billing you for restoration costs. She stopped and turned back. You think you've won something here? I'll see you in court. Looking forward to it. The legal proceedings were swift and decisive. Patricia's attorney withdrew from the case within a week after reviewing the evidence, leaving her to represent herself in a property dispute she couldn't win. The court ruled in my favor on every count. Patricia was ordered to remove her landscaping improvements from my property at her own expense, pay $8,000 in damages for unauthorized use of my land, and reimburse me for legal fees. The judge also issued a permanent injunction preventing her from entering my property for any reason. But the real victory came from the State Bar Association investigation. Patricia's practice of using her law firm to generate revenue from HOA enforcement actions violated multiple ethics rules. She received a public reprimand, a $10,000 fine, and was required to complete 30 hours of ethics training. The HOA board voted to terminate their relationship with Patricia's law firm and hired an independent management company to handle association business. They also voted to refund all fines that had been imposed without proper documentation, totaling over $15,000 in restitution to affected residents. Patricia's house went on the market 3 months later. She and her husband moved to a different county, presumably to find new victims for her schemes. Today, Millbrook Estates is a genuinely peaceful community. Our new HOA board focuses on actual maintenance issues rather than manufactured violations. Residents no longer live in fear of arbitrary fines and legal threats. Children play in their yards without worrying about noise complaints. Mrs. Chen's driveway is perfectly maintained, and she's never received another violation notice. My work van sits proudly in my driveway, where it belongs. The disputed land is now a small vegetable garden that my daughters help maintain. The most satisfying part wasn't the money or the legal victory, it was watching Patricia's face when she realized that her carefully constructed system of intimidation and fraud had finally encountered someone who understood the law better than she did. Property rights exist for a reason. They protect ordinary people from those who would abuse positions of authority to serve their own interests. Patricia Kellerman learned that lesson the hard way. Sometimes, the best way to deal with a bully is to show them that their power was always an illusion. The law is bigger than any HOA president, and justice is more powerful than intimidation. The fence still stands on my property line, exactly where it belongs, and it always will.